Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is our Homeschool Concierge One-on-One with Rachel from Wild Learning. I'm Wendy Eklund. I'm a longtime homeschool mom of three, and I am in Southern California.
I'm Paige McKinney. I'm a longtime unschooling mom of three, and I've recently relocated from California to the East Coast, Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Paige and I are with Homeschool Concierge, which is a nonprofit organization set up to serve the homeschool community.
We do a lot of stuff to help you guys. We are an educational nonprofit that's run by homeschool parents. We offer free virtual talks like this one year-round on a variety of educational topics. We have a free monthly newsletter with original articles and unique resources. You can sign up for that on our website. We monitor and help the community as a whole respond to legislation that may impact homeschooling, charter schools, and school choice. And there's been a lot of that this spring in California.
Yeah.
We have access to free resources on our website to help you homeschool. We offer in-person and right now virtual field trips. We're really excited to get back to that. And we also have educational events and workshops. And we offer homeschool as well as educational consulting for families and charter school staff.
And today we're here live with Rachel Tidd from Wild Learning. We're so excited to have you. When we first logged in, we were like screaming with joy. So thank you for being here, Rachel.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to be here and talk with you today.
Good. I think we wanted to get started with just kind of getting to know you and what got you started in what was used to just be Wild Math.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm Rachel Tidd. I'm the author of Wild Math and now Wild Reading. They are both nature-based outdoor curriculums that I was inspired to write by my own children. So I'm a homeschooling mom of two. I have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old now. I started writing these a couple of years ago, so they were like kindergarten, pre-K kindergarten, and maybe third grade. So they've moved along with me. But I was mostly inspired by my youngest child, who's definitely a mover, a shaker. He had some sensory issues, but he was thriving in Forest Preschool. So when we had him evaluated, they were like, you know, all of his needs are being met here. He's doing fabulous. And I was like, I already knew we were homeschooling because we were homeschooling my oldest. And I was like, how can I, you know, Forest Preschool doesn't last forever. So how can, after Forest Preschool is over, how can I use this that's obviously working so well for him and to help him learn, you know, more academic skills? Because I am a teacher. I was a special ed teacher for many years. And so I was like, started looking around and there's just nothing. There was just nothing, especially in math. And it seems so natural that you could use natural materials and all of these things to learn math outside. And so I started doing some things and my friend was like, you need to write this down. And I was like, no one wants to see this. This is not, no. And but she kept at it and I did start writing it down, and that's how Wild Math was started. And it started out really little. And it's become pretty popular now. So it's really exciting to see the movement and people get excited and see other people's kids doing my ideas, which is kind of fun.
That's so fun. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's a wonderful place to teach math. There's so many just patterns in nature that are math related. So why not teach math in nature?
And there's so much natural and observation and, you know, questions that come up. Yeah, it goes hand in hand to me. And then I decided to, you know, reading was always something I was when I was a special ed teacher, that's what you often mostly do is work with kids on reading, because that's, you know, your biggest goal for kids and where most kids have a lot of issues. So it seemed kind of natural to dive into that. And that was a big job. There's a lot more moving pieces in math than in math. You know, math is very linear and straightforward, and reading there's, you know, sight words and phonological awareness and sounds and blending and all these different pieces and fluency. So
right.
Yeah.
Rachel, thank you, sorry. Wondered if we could go back just a little smidge to defining forest preschool for those who may not be aware of what that is.
Yeah, so Forest Preschool is a model based out of Scandinavia, usually Sweden or Norway and places, Denmark. It's all very popular there, where it's like preschool, but it's all outside. Like they never go inside. So I live in upstate New York. We get about 80 to 100 inches of snow. It's very cold. Like people often write me like, can you do this in the winter? And I just laugh because yeah. So they do everything outside. The Forest Preschool that we were involved in was a pretty traditional, what they would say traditional forest school. So they had like an emergent curriculum based on kind of the kids and the seasons. There was a lot of open-ended play. I'm big in play-based learning, especially for really young children. So, you know, and they're allowed to do things like get covered in mud and bounce on logs and use tools and knives and make fires with, you know, with
Right.
people. They're not just like flinging them around, but that kind of thing. So that's basically Forest Preschool. You know, there's various models out there, but that's like a very traditional one.
Yeah, thank you. I did notice, if for anyone who's interested, that model does carry on through elementary. There's plenty of Facebook groups about forest schooling and how homeschoolers can apply it.
Yes.
So
yes, and my kids do, the same organization does like a homeschool program, but it's not like, it's like 1 day a week as opposed to, you know, like
full immersion,
2 to 4 days, depending on what you signed up for.
right.
You know, so it's a little less time. So my kids went from that to the homeschool program, but
I see.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Thank you.
There's other resources that go along with this. I know we have some forest schools here in California. Paige's children did them before we knew they were forest schools.
I didn't know what they were called. I just knew it was really working for my very curious kids to play.
Yes.
Right.
They're amazing. I wish we had like more opportunities here. I know there's definitely, and there's schools all over the country because I've talked to them because they've contacted me or what have you, or they've, you know, purchased Wild Math. And so I look up their school and I'm like, oh my gosh, your school is so cool. So there's definitely places.
So Wild Math is going into those schools.
Yes.
And Wild Learning now, Wild Reading maybe too, huh?
Right.
Yes. I mean, I wrote Wild Reading more for the homeschooler, but there's actually quite even few public schools that have purchased Wild Math, especially with the pandemic. So
goodness,
it's really, really exciting.
That is so exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting.
I'm so happy for those kids.
I know.
Right? I don't know what a treat it is they're getting.
I know. I'm excited too. Just more than 20 minutes outside, because that's what our local elementary school does, is about 20 minutes outside. Wow. That's why we're not there. So, you know, just the thought that they're getting out a little bit more is exciting.
More, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you.
So can you tell us what made you decide to move from just having Wild Math to including now Wild Reading?
Well, I felt like a lot of my audience starts off around, you know, that same kind of period that I went with my son. Like, all right, we're done with the Forest Preschool. Now we're diving in full on, you know, homeschooling for kindergarten. So I always have a very large, kindergarten is the best selling level, kindergarten and first grade. And I felt, you know, I was getting a lot of emails about, you know, do you have any ideas about, you know, literacy or reading or teaching my child to read? Because I really want to keep going with this model of, you know, a lot of people call it wild schooling, nature schooling, that kind of thing. And there wasn't a lot out there. There's some things that are pretty literature based, but there's nothing that I felt that really kind of conquered the piece of teaching your child to actually read. There's lots of literature-based exposure to language arts in that way. But as a special ed teacher, I have particular opinion method that I feel is a good way to teach children to read. And we touched on this a little bit before we got on the webinar, but there's been a lot of research, obviously, on reading, and in the United States, especially in schools mostly, and it trickles down to us homeschoolers, that we assume our reading technique is working because 40% of our students are reading well, right? So 40% of students will always learn to read no matter what you do. If you did nothing, they will learn to read. And and we hear this in the homeschool community all the time, right? Oh, my kid taught themselves to read. And I have one of those children, absolutely taught himself to read. No problem. But those aren't the kids I'm worried about. And those are the kids you hear about. And you hear about this in homeschool circles all of the time. Like, oh, they'll eventually learn to read. They'll eventually figure it out. In my opinion, and I know people are going to disagree, and that's fine, but I don't really believe that. I know that people hire tutors and kids need a lot of help, and in the homeschool community, whether they're in school or not, right? And the same thing happens in schools. We give them a reading program and they're like, wow, it's working. Well, it's working because it looks like it's working, because 40% of the kids, didn't matter what you did for them, they were going to learn to read. We're really arguing over those 60% of kids that need more. And the ironic thing is, so when you find, what you really need to do is, we do need to teach more phonics in our schools. For some reason, we've gotten away from phonics, and we've started teaching there's a lot out there now about the science of reading and how our brains learn to read, and the way we've been teaching kind of like cancels out the phonics that we are also teaching.
I read that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I wrote a whole chapter about it. But basically, when we're learning to read, it's on one side of our brain, and it goes back and forth on that side of the brain. And then we will say, and that's when you're like learning phonics in your, it's called orthographic mapping. So we don't really memorize a word by sight, but we orthographic map it in our brains via the sounds and the parts of the words and the letter combinations. And that's how we get that's how we can read, pick up a book, and we're not sounding out every word anymore, right? We don't sound out words anymore when we read. We have a bank of like 60,000 words that we can just read, right? We don't sound it all out.
I'm thinking of when I read those books about dinosaurs, and then I'm definitely sounding out dinosaur names.
Right, because we have not orthographic mapped that. That's not in our daily, weekly, monthly, whatever. Right. So our brains, it goes from the back of your brain on one side to the front, and that's efficient, right? So we want kids to do that. And then when we teach them phonics, that's what our brain is doing, and we're reinforcing those neurological pathways. But what we've been doing, and what's super popular as of like today in the United States, and not so much, I don't think, in homeschooling, but if your kid has ever been in a classroom, we will say, look at the picture. We will say, look at the first letter. We will say, skip it. What would make sense? And as soon as you do those things, you are moving to the other side of your brain. So you are no longer reinforcing those important neural pathways that will make you map those words to retain later, to become a better reader. You're putting them over here on the other side of the brain, and then you have to come back. So you're reinforcing super inefficient brain like pathways, right? So if you're already a struggling reader, and now you're saying, oh, forget those phonics, come over here and look at the picture, you're just canceling out all of the work that you just did. And you're making your brain work inefficiently, right?
Yeah,
so
I'm already
teaching it the wrong way to go. So being that I'm a little, I'll get off my soapbox now, but I wrote a whole chapter. There's a ton out there. So that research was done in the 80s. And as a nation, I should say, of very poor readers, if you look at the data, you know, we're still, our kids still can't read any better than they did in the 80s. And we've had this research. So it is finally turning. There's a lot of talk out there in the education community of like how we are teaching reading and how we need to be teaching reading. And so I spent a lot of time on that when I developed Wild Reading. So I really tried to take the outdoor piece, the nature piece. I didn't want it to be boring because I have taught, you know, like Orton Gillingham based reading, and it can be really dry. It can be dry. Or we were talking earlier about the Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons.
Right.
It can be exceedingly dry, right?
Right.
So I pulled in a bunch of stuff that I think makes it more interesting, like the story element from reading or from Waldorf, where there's
Oh, yeah.
so each letter sound is, there's an overarching story about a mouse named Matilda and her adventure up a mountain. And every week you get a different, you read aloud a different portion of the story to introduce the letter sound. And it just makes it more engaging and interesting.
Yeah.
And I pulled in a lot of things I like about Montessori to make it more hands-on. So it's kind of like all my favorite things put together. I don't know.
That's amazing. I want to get it just to read the part that explains all of this research. I think you say get off your soapbox. I say don't.
Don't get off that soapbox, Rachel. Well, we were talking before, just while we were getting started, that I use the Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons for my boys, my older two boys who are 17 and 13 now. And it worked great for Athen, who did every single lesson. And then Hudson did the beginning of it, wasn't really that interested, taught himself to read on Minecraft. So like you said, he's one of the 40% that would teach themselves. And Athen maybe was too, I'm not sure. But my now 8-year-old has no interest in doing that book and doesn't want, she is like resistant to reading. She doesn't want me to teach her. So I'm so buying this curriculum because I think it will excite her. And we did a free download that you offered, I think it was last summer, maybe during COVID you offered it, and she liked doing that. So I think, oh, this will be perfect. So I can't wait to try it.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll give me permission to let Paige read your chapter.
Oh yeah, I can send it to you, Paige.
It sounds so awesome for kids who are just a little bit older too, because I did Hooked on Phonics with my first. My father-in-law went to Costco and bought this big box at Costco. They used to sell the whole thing there.
I remember that box.
Back in there, like on cassette tapes. I'm totally dating myself now. This is like but it worked for the younger set, you know, it's going to Dr. Seussy, all the rhyming, you know, Matt and Cat and Rat. But when you're trying to do that with an 8-year-old who's maybe like, that's too juvenile for me, then you're trying to piece together other ways to introduce phonics, like totally traditionally, originally homeschooling. And that can be very overwhelming.
It is.
And so to have you put something together that can help those slightly older kids who maybe don't want to read the Dr. Seussy type phonics books feel like, you know, phonics is still something that they need to do. I think that's so wonderful.
Yeah.
And I will say that there is still, it's hard to get around reading some of those, you know, books. And there is, you know, we do the word families in this Wild Reading because it scaffolds between your early phonological awareness, which is all those phonemes and letter sounds that you have to learn. And you keep learning those until end of 2nd grade. So the idea is that word families can help scaffold you and bridge that gap while you're still honing in those phonological skills. Because without those, you're not going to become an efficient reader. So, but it's kind of developmental. So the word families kind of scaffold it. And I do use Bob books, which are boring. But they're short. But the idea, there's 2 reasons I use them. One is they're super available. And
at Costco.
Our libraries even, our library has them. So,
yeah, that's great. Yeah.
They're affordable. They're, you know, and it's just a moment in time. And it's got a controlled vocabulary because you just don't want to be jumping to words and sounds that have not been introduced if you can help it. So what Wild Reading is, it's kind of called structured literacy. And the idea is that you do want to introduce sounds and word patterns in a structured sequential manner, building that vocabulary up in a certain, path. So
Okay.
that can be helpful for homeschoolers too, just to have that path set out.
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to piece everything together, if your child isn't in that 40%, they're gonna struggle. And I should say that when I heard you talking, that even if your child is one of those that would read in any way, the research has shown that they still would become a better reader being taught some phonics and doing a program, whether it's mine or Orton Gilling or whatever reading program. So they're still going to benefit and become a better reader than they would have, especially spelling wise. So it's a win-win. It helps everybody. It lifts everybody up. And, I think I know people my age can be very whole language based, because that's how we were taught to read. It's like, oh, just surround and we often, as homeschoolers, we live and breathe it, right? Surround them with good books, surround them with reading aloud. And that is great and absolutely important. That's why I have tons of read alouds and book lists in mine. But most kids, 60% of those kids are going to need a little bit more.
Now, I thought we always did that because we want our children to love literature, not necessarily to teach them to read. And what I find interesting is I went to school like in probably the 80s, I guess. I don't even know. But I'm not sure how I was taught to read, but I actually don't like reading. And I know that I struggled with reading when I was young. And so I wonder if maybe those pathways weren't, like, if they're not connected in my brain. And so reading is maybe still difficult for me. And that's why I don't enjoy it. And so I used to tell my husband, like, don't tell the kids I don't like reading. Like, it was this big secret.
Right.
I want them to love to read, but I'm wondering if that's at all connected. That's so interesting.
Or it's less efficient, right? Like,
yeah, if I'm struggling with it, it's like I'm reading less efficiently than I could have if I had been taught a different way. Right.
And see, I remember having learned to read before I went to school.
Oh, wow.
One of those kids who was sitting there going like, why can't they figure this out? Because my mom was doing phonics with us informally through like Dr. Seuss books, because we went to the library every week. And so it really clicked for me. And so I remember in school there being a lot of pictures and there being a lot of, beautiful illustrations, but it wasn't something that, because I already knew how to read. It was just, I was an observer watching everybody learn and hoping they picked it up, because they were certainly slowing the class down.
Right.
I remember that feeling.
Well, yeah,
your class page, I would have been slowing you down.
I was so bored in school, you guys.
Yeah,
well, my parents had to hire extra. I did NAJU reading clinic for like 4 years.
Oh, wow.
You're lucky that they did.
I don't know that it exists anymore, but I liked it. I thought that part was enjoyable. So yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on this for my Bailey who just walked in here. That's awesome. I had some questions about, and looking over the website, besides using nature, I saw that you have like your Amazon kind of list. What other types of things do you have to purchase to make the curriculum work? Or are those just extra bonus things that you can purchase? How does it work?
So I think, so the most of the things that are on the Amazon, so you don't really need to purchase much to do the wild math. Most of them are natural materials. I do a lot of things like with recyclable materials, like volume with different things from your recycling bin, things like that. Yeah, I know, right? They're great for that.
Right, yeah.
But on the back of at the end of every chapter, every unit in every level of wild math is a book list. And I get a lot of emails about this. They're not required. I just think they're an easy way to get a little more math in your day, because a lot of people do like a morning basket, or, you have a stack of read alouds, or you go to the library and grab a lot of books. Grab some math books. Here's some books that relate to geometry or addition or whatever you're working on. And so I like to have those in there. I don't really suggest that you purchase any unless there's some that you really love, because math books usually aren't the best. Like they're not like our favorite picture books ever.
Right.
They get the job done, and they, they will hit a certain, some people learn better in a story. It's like another repetition in a different way. It's kind of sneaky. It's a great thing to do. So if you can get them through the library or interlibrary loan, that's what I suggest. I don't suggest buying them unless there's like a specific topic your child's really having trouble with and you like desperately need another way to present it. And then I also have lists of games. And while I don't say games are like required, I don't in Wild Math have worksheets. It's not that I'm against worksheets, but I do think that you can get a lot of your fact fluency and practice through games a lot more enjoyably and effectively. Anything with 2 dice that you're adding together is addition facts, and that goes more smoothly with kids than it does a whole page of addition facts, right?
That's
and
true.
I find a lot of the games at thrift stores and book sales, so they're great to throw on grandparents' holiday wish lists. You can really build up your game, or you can just pick a few from what your child needs to work on the most. If they're really struggling with subtraction, then look over that chapter, and pick a game or 2 to start with. There, by no means do you need to buy them all. There's also tons of, and everyone knows, there's tons of free ones online.
Right.
I do suggest a few books, like Denise Gaskins has a whole book of games that you can use with cards and dice that are fabulous. So you can do it really inexpensively. But I really think they provide the practice piece that you don't necessarily get when you're doing a couple problems outside, or it's just hard to do that much review and to kind of get automaticity in those facts and things.
I love that. I love that that's your way of introducing repetition instead of the worksheet.
Yeah, I mean, I will say it is absolutely fine if your child likes worksheets,
right?
Or if you like worksheets. I have one child that my kids get choices, and I have one child that always chooses a worksheet.
Every child,
because it's fast and it's easy for him, fine, and I have one that forget it. Can you guess which one? The younger one. So it's absolutely fine. And a lot of people like to get like a cheap math workbook to throw in with their Wild Math, to kind of just throw in there. It's a rainy day, I don't know, it gives them, I don't know. People makes them feel better.
And there's also so many free. You can find so many free math worksheets online now too.
For sure.
We have a big resource and we're adding to it. It's like a living document of all the different types of things that you can get for free. And I just wanted to go back just a bit about the Amazon thing. I love that you made it like a whole Amazon wish list. Because you can share that, it's mobile friendly. You can be walking around at the thrift store and be like, let me check the Amazon wish list and see if this is on there. I just think that's so smart. Thank you.
I have mixed emotions about Amazon for sure.
I know we all do,
and I get some comments about it, but if I post anything, I get so many questions. What is that? Where do you get that? And it's just so much easier to throw an Amazon link and you can check that out on your own. You don't have to buy it from Amazon, but it's there. Everyone can access it.
You can choose what seller you want to buy from in the marketplace. You could buy from an independent seller and surpass the free Prime shipping if you wanted to support a local person.
Right.
On Amazon.
Or like, I like your idea, like you can whip it out on your phone in the thrift store.
Right, while you're in the thrift store to see if it's there.
Garage sale.
For me, that's how I would use it, because if you're doing it without any financial support from a charter, which many states across the United States, like we talked about, don't have them, then you're doing it out of your own pocketbook. And hey, the thrift store is another form of recycling. So
we've also, friends and I have like swapped games. So another good thing is if you have friends, you can swap games.
Yeah.
Oh, great
And
idea.
then, you get twice as many games or 3 times as many games because, you can only play a game so many times for a little while before
Right.
you want a new one. So if you rotate them, then and some libraries now have games too.
Yes.
Oh,
Well, and I was thinking, Paige, the charter schools are going to want the worksheets. So you're going to need some worksheets. So you're not going to need as many games.
Right.
You need your work samples.
You take pictures.
Yes.
You can also make kids record it, what they're math they're doing.
Videos.
Yes.
Yes, you could do a video of them outside in the snow or the mud.
I take lots of pictures.
You have
and you can't, and I don't know about your charter specifically, but I know for like portfolios that would absolutely work. And you cannot give me the argument that they never play games in school, because we absolutely did use games when I was teaching all the time, and you are allowed to take your kids outside. Well, I mean, we were allowed,
right?
People didn't always do that. So you could definitely make that argument that it's, they do this in real school.
Right. Yes. I do feel like that argument often.
I have a question. So it's wild learning now. So all I can think is Rachel planning wild writing next? Wild science? Well, you already do the science part, kind of.
Area.
Are you planning anything else?
No.
She just finished wild reading.
I know, but I can't help but ask while I have her here.
I know. Probably not. I feel like there's a lot out there with science. History is a little harder to do. It's so very place-based. However, I mean, my next thing will probably be the next level of wild reading. And as we talked about before, like it's a large.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yes.
It's pretty crazy. So it took me a year. Yeah, it took me a year, and I had quite a few people helping me, like graphic designers. There's a lot behind it that people don't see, and I still have to homeschool my own children.
Right.
Which people, I feel like when they email me, as soon as I release this, they're like, "Is there level 2?" And I'm like, "What do you think I've been doing? I've been up at 3 a.m. every day for the past 3 months. No,
I mean, it's such a bargain price what you offer it for all that you're offering.
Well, I figure people still have to print it. Still need to print it. So there's your other half, right? But it relieves me from having to ship it, and pay someone to ship it or try to do all of that myself, because it's really just me, and my husband helps with the accounting and the business side of it now, not always, just recently, because it got to be too much.
Right.
I'm glad you have some help.
Yeah, so it's just a lot. In wild reading, it's just so much thicker. Like I can show you here. So there's kindergarten, there's wild reading. It's a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
There's just a lot more to explain. And I did in wild reading do a lot with in what I call enrichment, which has a ton of science and some history and art and things that are related to the letter sound, so that you really don't need another curriculum, especially at this age. So I'm very I like to hit more than one stone at the same time. So that's just how my brain thinks. So I'm like, if I'm going to do M, I'm going to throw monarch butterflies and they're in moths, and we're going to call that science, and then we're going to write about it, and we're going to call it writing, and it's done.
Oh, man, that's such dedication. I really appreciate that. You didn't take the easy way out.
No,
I can't. It's just not, I don't know. If I'm going to do it, I have to, it just comes out, and I had to do it. It's almost, I have to cut it down after, like this is too much.
Right. I love that you're letting
maybe you already have the second year done.
What?
Maybe you already have the second year done. It's in all the cutouts.
I know, right? Well, I got to do all the next sounds. We did short vowels and wild reading and digraphs and blends, but now you have to do like what's called welded sounds, like ang and ing and ung and silent e. The next step.
Right. Well, I think you have time, so don't worry about it. Enjoy your summer. No,
I know. I've told people, I'm like, I need a little break. That was really intense.
Yeah.
I got like no sleep.
Oh my, I can't even
And so,
imagine. Yes. I mean, can you hold that thing up one more time? That
Yes,
is
I want
such,
to see it again.
so it's
Wow.
it's pretty intense, and I
Yes.
made it more open and go. So like at the beginning, let's see, there's a week and it's all planned out for you. I mean, not
Right.
your enrichment activities, but and this is all on the website. Like I have a whole chapter and a half at least up there. To try to make it more open and go, because I know people with Wild Math wish it was more open and go. And I just released actually today, first and second grade week-long plans for the whole year. I really resisted doing this for a long time because I really don't feel like I should be the one telling you what you should be doing with your child, because I don't
Right.
know them at all. And it's completely arbitrary. You know, it's just kind of going in a sequence of what I think it should go, but I don't know if your child needs
Right.
2 more weeks of subtraction practice. I have no idea.
right.
So it's definitely with a grain of salt. I think it just makes people feel better that those plans are there and they can look at them.
I think it does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does.
But and a lot of new, especially with the pandemic, when a lot of people were new to homeschooling, they were panicking, and I understand that. But I also know, right, as seasoned homeschoolers, that you can plan something out and you just usually end up, even as a teacher, you just end up throwing it away. Like you don't end up doing those plans. Nothing ever goes towards those plans. So
No,
I kind of felt like putting all the effort into making the plans, and I knew very few people were going to make it to the end. But I did it anyway.
I think it
And-
really helps. I
Yeah.
remember when I was a new homeschooler,
Right.
I entered a charter because I actually wasn't planning to homeschool. And if I had found a forest school that served the
Right.
primary grades, that's probably the direction we would have gone. So I needed that support. And if I thought that a whole thing was put together, oh man, I would have felt so comfortable. It was only in my later years of, like you say, being a veteran, that I started piecing it together myself based on who my kids were as they're growing into themselves and as you're growing into yourself too.
For sure.
So
For
that
sure.
plan at the beginning, that's kind of it's like a security blanket. It helps you feel comfortable. Like, okay, I've got this.
Right.
That's one thing I can check off my list.
Or I like to just turning the next page and feel like I'm progressing through something, that's a nice feeling too. And to know that I've covered most everything that I was supposed to cover.
And it looks so pretty. Your book is so, even if people are printing it off themselves, those pictures, the illustrations, they look beautiful in the digital format. They'll look wonderful in the print format.
Right.
You can print off a little section if you need to, keep it in your little homeschool planner, take it with you when you go out on field trips or to the park day with your friends, and just kind of open it up, be like, okay, can we do this something while we're out here? And that leads me to ask if you could just talk a little bit about people that live in urban areas, people that don't have maybe even experience being outdoors and even knowing where to start. What do you recommend for them?
Yeah, so I do talk about that a little bit in Wild Math, not so much in Wild Reading because it's a little less strictly outdoor. Like there's a lot more flexibility on purpose built in. So I actually got my master's in New York City for teaching.
Wow.
So I student taught in the city.
I'm familiar
And
with
so,
that.
yeah, and that was a super interesting experience for someone that grew up in a really rural area, mostly. And the different knowledge base kids have, these kids could take the subway on their own to school, but they had no idea what different trees were, just a different knowledge base.
Right.
Completely. But not better or worse, just different.
Navigation, right?
Yeah. So I definitely thought about kids in more urban environments or without access. If you live in an apartment building, sometimes it can be hard to access even green space. Because you can't be near their parking lot or they're spraying the yard or stuff like that. So I chalk is usually your best friend because, you usually have access to a paved area, a sidewalk, a stoop, a patio, even those little patios on your like apartments that have like a little balcony.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I often say chalk is always useful. Pocket parks are useful. You can do a lot of different math, and I do talk about this kind of math in Wild Math, where I actually suggest going on a geometry walk in a town or a city, because the geometry is so amazing and it's everywhere, right? How many rectangles, octagons, stained glass, bricks, like all kinds of things, manhole cover circles, and it's everywhere. And you start looking at it and kids get really exciting. I mean, you can go to town, it can be anywhere. And also numbers are everywhere in a city. The street signs, the store prices, it's like everywhere. And you can do a lot with we do like decimal walks and estimation walks and that kind of thing. So there's a lot built in that can help you with that. Nothing in it really requires you being out in a forest. A lot of my pictures are kind of out in a forest because I live surrounded by forest. That's just where I live. It's just an example. It doesn't have to be that way. You could easily, a lot of it was with sticks. If you don't have sticks, I suggest popsicle sticks. Like, it doesn't really matter what it is. If you don't have acorns, but you have gravel, that works. Or you have just some blocks, that works too. I mean, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the hands-on part. And I think if you can be outside, that's even better.
I think it's a great place to start, because lots of us think if we live in an urban area, I don't now, I live more rural country, but we don't think there's nature around. But once you go outside and you open your eyes, you might even find there's like pine cones on your city street.
Right.
You didn't see before, and they're just right there in front of you to discover.
Yes. And there's always playgrounds and parking in like pocket parks in New York City, there's always a playground somewhere. You kind of have to go a little bit, you might have to walk to it. It's not going to be outside your door.
Right.
And I always suggest that when you do bigger excursions, even in New York City, you could go to wildlife refuges and beaches and the botanical gardens and zoos. There's quite a lot available. And you can pick up sticks and shells and take them home and then use them outside on your sidewalk or, or inside even. We had a lot of families last year with the wildfires that were doing Wild Math inside.
Right.
It was absolutely dangerous to go outside. You couldn't go, so, and I talked about that a little bit in Wild Reading in the introduction. I'm like, I needed to make this really flexible because every family is different. Every circumstance is different. There could be a pandemic. There could be wildfires. You don't know, and so you have to be able to, I had to write it in a way that, well, you could do this inside, but you could also do this outside. Maybe you just had a baby. Maybe it's not going to work today. I don't pretend to know, but I know from my own life that not everything works out the way I want it to.
Right.
So, and there's no shame in that. If it doesn't work, just do your best,
Yes, just do your best. Yeah. And a lot of people have to walk their dogs, and they may not think of that as getting outside, but it absolutely is.
Absolutely.
Your dog wants to go on the grass. Pretty soon you're finding the grassy spots, and there might be, seed pods and other little things over there.
Right. And there's a lot of research about outdoor time and how even if you just do the lesson outside, even if you're not doing anything with the outside, even if you're just sitting out there and doing your read aloud outside, or even if it was like a math worksheet outside, that the gains in attention and focus and engagement increase for that activity, but they also go into the next activity. So even if you go inside after that and did, writing,
right.
That all of those gains in attention, engagement, focus, all of those things would last into the next lesson. So just by changing your location, just by sitting outside on the stairs, or sitting
Yeah,
in a park. So there's that to think about too.
yeah, absolutely.
It's like a 2-for-1.
And we need vitamin D. We
Yes.
need a little bit of that. And it's just so good for the kids just to get outside for just a little bit, even if it's hard for you.
Right.
Yes.
If you live 10 stories up, just go outside for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And kids love going to the parks. And even like you were saying, even in New York City, there's parks. I remember I lived there for a short time, went to college, and yeah, Central Park was not that far. And then there was also little,
There's
like,
quite a few,
Yeah.
the playgrounds, because I didn't have kids, but I've returned. We live about 4 hours away from New York City.
right.
And I've returned with my own kids. And so it makes you more aware of the
Right.
playgrounds too. But they're really every couple, they're pretty all over. And there's lots of little park like fountains. I love fountains because there's money in them, guys.
Public gardens. I remember seeing lots of public gardens, like,
Yes.
and then
And
they had like open walking areas. Like even if you weren't one of the people gardening, you could still walk through and enjoy the gardens that the neighborhood
Yes.
had planted. So
yes.
I remember that. Yeah.
And the fountains have money, so you can talk
Yes.
about like how much money do you think is in here? How much
Right.
money do you think is in this little area? What coins
Right.
do you see? How much are they worth? It gets really exciting
Yeah.
for me. Just
That is it. That is
I feel
exciting.
bad for my children when I do this, but I'm like, stop, look at this. They're
Right.
like, Mom.
I noticed you mentioned earlier, we talked a bit about all of the things that kind of inspired Wild Math as far as Waldorf and Montessori. Do you find that people use this if they're doing Waldorf or Montessori, that this might be a supplement for them, or
Yeah. I mean, I have people from all kinds of educational philosophies.
Charlotte Mason?
Yes, a lot of people with Charlotte Mason do use it because it kind of goes really well with their whole, outside learning and nature study.
Nature stuff.
And there's a lot of nature study and wild reading.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it kind of bridges that gap. I find that most people, here I go, it's really hard to stick with one philosophy.
Yes.
Especially as a homeschooler. It's hard to be a purist, right?
I tried.
Inevitably,
Failed.
no matter how hard you try, and you have these variables called children
Yes.
that often might work really well with this particular thing or this particular method, but they also really do well with this from over here, or
Yeah.
are struggling with this and could need something from over here. So most people end up picking and choosing, and that's certainly what I do. I do know people that are really into Waldorf that really love this because it integrates some of that. I know people that are really into Montessori because it does a lot with the movable alphabet. Is it like a super, I wouldn't say it like goes super well with any of those things. Like, can you use it as a supplement? Absolutely. Can you use it along with it? Absolutely. There's a ton of handwork in wild reading. I like Waldorf a lot. I think it's hard to do as a homeschooler.
Yes, and they'll say that, like the Waldorf purists will say, like, it can't be done, like it has to be done by a Waldorf trained teacher.
Yeah.
And we've been through like Waldorf preschool before we found like a forest outdoor preschool, and the teachers were so committed and at a
Right.
level that I could not even commit to. Like
And there's a lot with like other kids in a circle,
Mhm.
a lot of games and things that it's just hard to translate. I mean, my kids are kind of 3 years apart, so like a morning circle, if you had kids closer together, it might work better. My kids are skill-wise very far apart too, so that doesn't help.
Right.
And I love Montessori when my oldest was young too, and I love a lot of things about Montessori.
Yes.
I love the hands-on. I get a lot of emails like, could you do this? Could you do this with Wild Math? And you absolutely can. You absolutely can. And a lot of people use Wild Math along with their very standard traditional math program, and that is absolutely fine. I made it so that you can line up, measurement chapter to measurement chapter, subtraction in addition to, subtraction. It's very typical. It follows exactly what is typically taught in each grade in the United States. And actually, very
Wow.
similar to other countries, because I've looked at Canada and Australia and Great Britain too. The years are just slightly off.
Oh
Right.
man, that's so reassuring for so many parents who are first starting out and
Yeah.
really want that. I remember when I was first starting out, I went to the California State Standards and read through all of them. Some of them I was surprised, like, that's a standard? We covered that in kindergarten,
Right.
like for first grade, you know. And then other things, maybe you don't necessarily feel like you need to follow them, but it's nice to know that something is aligned. But I want to go completely opposite for just a second and suggest that it's also wild math, wild learning, wild reading. I think is also great for those who might be more unschooly, because you can do sort of stealth schooling. You can read it as the parent, and then when you're out living your life and following their interests, you can kind of maybe introduce an activity or do, especially when they're little and they're,
Yeah.
you know, they're putting
Yeah.
sticks together in rows, and you could kind of put that together for yourself without making it something formal for your child if you choose not to.
Right. And I think honestly, when I wrote it, that was kind of my
That was your approach?
that was my approach, especially for the younger kids. There's a lot of play-based ideas.
Yes.
And I feel like these things
I
kind of
love
come
that.
up, you know, when you have like a ton of sticks or a ton of pine cones, and kids
Mhm.
start naturally sorting them, or
Yes.
when you throw a scale out there and kids are like weighing
Yeah.
them and comparing, or putting them in
Right, or
volume
food.
containers and things
Mhm.
like that. And, you know, so naturally it gets a little harder in like 5th grade. And you will see that in Wild Math changes a little. It does.
Okay.
There's a lot more explanation for
Mhm.
parents on how to divide fractions and how you kind of get to the traditional algorithm and how you build up that. We do it with mud pies, by the way, pretty
Oh,
exciting.
okay,
And
great.
how you build that like understanding of what you're doing, not just flipping the reciprocal, because everyone did that and nobody understands why.
Right.
You know, and how we get there. So yeah, so I kind of wanted it to be more like pull it out of your back pocket, like, oh, I remember this great thing, or I would like to
I
target this
totally
and I'm
get
looking
that.
for that
I
during the
really
day.
felt that from previewing the kindergarten, and I love
Yeah.
that so much because I don't think you need to be forcing a lot of stuff on the littles.
And there's not a lot, honestly, in kindergarten standards that kids need to know, that you couldn't just integrate. Like counting to 100 is like one of the big things in kindergarten. It takes like the whole year, but there's so many opportunities to do counting
Right.
anywhere you are, right?
Right,
And
yes.
there's a bunch of ideas, so you can just pick an idea and kind of like casually introduce it. Like, oh, let's count the clouds today, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, I think it can work for anyone. I think wild math, wild learning, and probably wild reading. I haven't previewed it, and my kids are way past that, so my memory of what they did is kind of, you know, it's kind of gone, but I'm certain that it would work for almost anyone. Just, you know, knowing that you've approached it from this really special perspective. You know, like you have all this background, you have all this education, and yet some of it you've kind of, you know, tossed aside a little bit.
Yes, definitely.
And then some of it you've, you know, used it to build something incredibly different than what you would have had to use if you were in school.
Right.
Do you think they would have allowed you? Because you say now schools are using wild math.
I think you would have to be incredibly motivated as an educator. There are teachers out there that are absolutely making it work and do this kind of stuff. It just takes a lot of work. I know there are a few states that are very strict in the curriculum, has to be approved.
Mhm.
So that's a little harder. But a lot of states, I mean, you could use wild math, and in schools do here.
Well, I mean, shout out to those teachers.
It's just a lot. It's a lot of work, because what teaching has become a lot now is, it used to be when we went to school that teachers made a lot of their own curriculum.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they designed their own unit studies.
Yes.
And that's what made it really rich and exciting and interesting for the teachers as well as the students.
And the students.
There has been a transition as we've gone to more testing, that now it's a very scripted curriculum that teachers are provided, and it's like day by day, almost like what they're supposed to say. Now, most people don't read it, but it's kind of like supposed to be like leveling the board of like kids are getting a similar experience, whether their teacher's experienced or not, etc. But it's very bland. It lacks that creativity that,
Yes.
you know,
Right.
when you think back to your own education, like, oh, like I had this teacher that did this amazing rainforest, you know, unit, right?
I
You think
remember
back to
things like
those
that.
things.
Yes.
Some of that has been taken out because they have to follow this rigid, you know, program that the school district has paid a bunch of money and following, right? And
Right. And
Right.
it's stricter than it was.
definitely.
But those teachers are the ones in the classroom and they know what those kids need and how they're going to learn. So that bothers me.
Oh, and it bothers teachers too. It
Yeah.
does. It does. You know, but
Give the power back to the teachers.
I know. It's hard. It was frustrating. But then too, you know, teachers are so overwhelmed
Yeah.
by so
hard.
many other things, administrative tasks and
Yeah.
all these other things that you don't really see,
Right.
that they have less time
Right.
to work on these things, I
Yeah,
feel like.
I mean, this reminds me, we recently talked to a teacher who was talking about the divide between administration and teaching and how it's a bigger divide than it used to be. That there
Mhm.
used to be
Yeah.
teachers that were also administrators, or they were able to bring that experience in, and now it's this bigger divide. And so makes me feel bad. And I hope that Wild Learning can spread to more schools and
Yes.
free those teachers.
Right.
You know.
Yes. Oh
and
my
help
gosh.
those
Well,
students.
we are coming up on an hour. I think Rachel had a discount she was going to offer to our followers. And so we will post that. Rachel, do you want to talk a little bit about that and what it would be good for?
It'll probably be a 10% discount off of anything in the Wild Learning shop. So that's Wild Math and Wild Learning.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So
Thank
Thank you so much. That's so generous.
no problem.
Incredibly generous. Yes, thank you.
Did you have any more questions or anything else, or do you think we covered everything?
I think we're good.
Oh my gosh. Rachel, thank you so much for taking so much time with us. We truly appreciated getting a chance to meet you.
I had a wonderful time chatting with you, Rachel.
No
Thank you.
problem. I had a great time too. It was so good meeting you guys.
You too.
We
And it's
love
great
what you
that
do.
We got
We're
to
a huge
postpone.
fan.
So you had more. We could talk about wild reading.
Yeah.
Thank you. All
No
right.
problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Have a great day.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.